The sun hung low over the cracked asphalt of Milford's Old Town Square, casting long shadows that danced like ghosts across the charity food line. It was one of those sweltering afternoons where the air shimmered with heat, carrying the faint tang of overripe fruit from the donation bins and the murmur of weary voices. Families shuffled forward, plates in hand, their faces etched with the quiet desperation of another month scraping by. At the end of the line stood a girl, no more than 16, her dark hair tied back in a frayed ponytail that did little to hide the white cane clutched in her right hand. Mara Lewis tapped it lightly against the ground, her unseeing eyes fixed on some invisible horizon. She was alone today, her mother too ill to make the trek, and the crowd's press made her steps hesitant, her free hand outstretched for balance. A sudden shove from behind rippled through the line like a wave. Some impatient man, reeking of stale sweat and frustration, barked at her to move faster. Mara's cane skittered across a loose pebble, and she stumbled, her plate clattering to the dirt. The food, mashed potatoes and a thin slice of bread, smeared into the dust, drawing a few pitying glances but no hands to help. She froze there, knees bent, fingers groping blindly for what was lost. A soft, choked sob escaped her lips, the kind that twisted the gut of anyone who heard it. In that moment the square felt smaller, the injustice sharper. A blind girl, abandoned to the grind of survival, her vulnerability laid bare under the indifferent sky. That's when the rumble started, a low, thunderous growl that built from the edge of the lot, vibrating through the ground like an approaching storm. Heads turned as a convoy of motorcycles sliced into view, their chrome frames glinting under the dying light. 30 strong they were, engines snarling in unison, leather-clad riders with patches sewn on their vests, iron promise. They weren't here to intimidate. This crew had a reputation for showing up where the world forgot its own. Leading them was Jonah Vale Cross, a man of 40, whose broad shoulders and salt and pepper beard spoke of roads travelled and burdens carried. His bike, a weathered black beast with scars from a dozen close calls, idled at the front as he killed the engine and swung a leg over, boots hitting the pavement with a solid thud. Jonah's eyes, sharp and shadowed by years of unspoken regrets, scanned the line. He'd come to lend a hand, his club often did, hauling supplies or standing guard against the petty thieves that haunted these events. But something pulled him toward the girl, an instinct honed from too many nights, pulling strangers from the wreckage of life. He approached quietly, the scent of warm leather and motor oil trailing him like a signature. Kneeling beside her, he didn't touch her at first, just let his presence settle, the way you'd approach a skittish animal. "Easy now," he said, his voice a gravelly baritone, steady as the horizon. "I've got you." Mara's hand, still fumbling in the dirt, brushed against his. Her fingers, calloused from years of navigating a sightless world, closed around something cool and metallic. The heavy silver ring on his right hand, engraved with a simple promise knot, worn smooth from constant wear. She paused, tilting her head as if listening to a distant echo. The line hushed around them, the convoy's arrival already shifting the air from defeat to wary hope. Jonah reached for her plate, scooping up what he could and brushing it off with a gentleness that belied his rough exterior. "Here, let me fix this," he murmured, but she didn't release the ring. Instead, her grip tightened and she lifted it closer to her face, tracing the ridges with her thumb. "It's you," she whispered, her voice barely above the fading rumble of engines. The words hung there, fragile and loaded, like a key turning in a long-forgotten lock. Jonah froze, his breath catching in a way that echoed through the sudden silence. Who was this girl? How could she know? His mind raced back unbidden to that night 8 years ago on the interstate, when a semi-truck had jackknifed in the rain, collapsing a bridge in a symphony of twisting metal and shattering glass. He'd been riding alone, chasing ghosts of his own, when he heard her. A woman's cries from the rubble, trapped and fading. No sight of her, just voice, raw and pleading. Jonah had talked her through it hour after hour, his words a lifeline in the dark. Breathe with me. One step at a time. I've got you. I promise I'll get you out. He'd guided her hand over hand, describing every shift of debris, every safe foothold, until rescuers arrived at dawn. In the chaos, he'd slipped her his ring as a token. Hold this. I'll come back for it. For you. But life had other plans. A club run gone south, a brother's betrayal, debts that chained him to the road. The promise slipped away, buried under the weight of survival. Now, this blind girl held that same ring, her touch evoking the cadence of his voice from stories her mother must have told, bedtime tales of the stranger who kept them alive, his breathing steady like a heartbeat, his words rhythmic as a lullaby. Mara's face, pale and knowing, broke into a tremulous smile. Mom described you, the way you sound, like thunder that's safe. She said you'd come back. Jonah's throat tightened, a dam cracking after years of stoic repair. He sank back on his heels, the ring still in her grasp, and for the first time since that bridge, tears welled unbidden. They traced hot paths down his weathered cheeks, silent at first, then spilling freely as sobs shook his frame, raw, childlike, the kind that stripped a man bare. The Iron Promise riders dismounted, forming a quiet circle, their faces a mix of confusion and solidarity. No questions yet. They knew their leader carried scars deeper than ink. Big Tom, Jonah's second, clapped a hand on his shoulder, the gesture saying what words couldn't, "We're here." In that dusty square, amid the scent of spilled food and cooling engines, a forgotten vow resurfaced. Jonah wiped his face with a trembling hand, reclaiming the ring but not the moment. "Tell me your name, kid," he said, voice thick, "and tell me everything." Mara straightened, her cane forgotten for a beat. "Mara, and it's a long story, one that starts with a promise." As the sun dipped below the rooftops, painting the sky in hues of fire and regret, Jonah knew this encounter wasn't chance. It was reckoning. The convoy would rally, resources pouring in like rain after drought, trainers for her independence, advocates to fight the shadows encroaching on her world. But for now, in the gathering dusk, he simply listened, the weight of honor pulling him back to the man he'd vowed to be. The food line resumed, but the air had changed, charged with the quiet power of lives intertwining. Jonah stood, helping Mara to her feet, her hand light on his arm. Behind them, the motorcycles waited, engines purring like guardians. Whatever storm brewed next, a developer eyeing her family's fragile home, old wounds reopening, it would face not one man, but a brotherhood forged in iron. The ring, once a token of absence, now gleamed as a beacon, guiding him home. The twilight deepened over Milford Square, turning the charity line into a silhouette of huddled forms against the fading orange glow. Jonah's arms steadied Mara as they moved toward the edge of the lot, away from the resuming shuffle of plates and murmurs. The Iron Promise riders formed a loose perimeter, their boots scuffing the gravel like a protective rhythm, eyes scanning for any lingering threats in the growing shadows. The air cooled slightly, carrying the metallic bite of exhaust mingled with the earthy scent of trampled dust. Jonah's tears had dried, leaving salty tracks on his skin, but the ache in his chest lingered, a raw echo of the promise he'd let slip through his fingers like rain on oiled leather. Mara's steps were tentative at first, her cane tapping a cautious path beside him, but there was a new sureness in her grip on his sleeve. "Mom's stories, they weren't just to make me sleep," she said softly, her voice cutting through the low hum of idling engines. "She'd describe you every night after the accident. The ring's weight, the way it felt like an anchor, and your voice, deep like gravel under tires, but warm. She said it pulled her from the dark." Jonah swallowed hard, guiding her to a weathered picnic bench near the donation trucks. He eased her down, then sat across, the wood creaking under his weight. Big Tom hovered nearby, arms crossed, his massive frame a silent sentinel, while the rest of the crew unloaded crates of fresh supplies, canned goods, blankets, whatever they could spare from their latest run. No one interrupted. This was Jonah's moment to unravel the thread. "Your mom," he began, the words rough in his throat. "What happened after? I meant to come back, but the road, it takes pieces of you." Mara's face tilted toward him, unseeing but attuned, as if she could map his regret through the timbre of his breath. "Her name's Elena. The bridge collapse left her broken, shattered leg, infections that doctors couldn't fix right away. But you got her out. That promise knot on your ring, she held it like a talisman through the surgeries, the therapies. Told me how you talked her through the pain, step by step until the sirens came. We moved here after to Milford, scraping by on her disability checks and odd jobs. She's bedridden now, worse these last months. The doctors say it's the old injuries catching up, but I think it's the weight of waiting." A flicker of guilt twisted in Jonah's gut, sharp as a wrench to the ribs. 8 years. He'd chased club business across state lines, buried brothers in unmarked graves, fought off rivals who saw iron promise as easy prey. The ring had stayed on his finger, a quiet accusation, but he'd convinced himself the woman had moved on, that promises like his dissolved in the chaos of survival. Now here was proof, a daughter's touch, bridging the gap. "Where is she now?" he asked, leaning forward, the bench groaning again. "Home, a few blocks from here, in the old apartments on Elm Street." Mara's voice dipped, laced with worry. "But they're not safe anymore. Some developer, Mr. Harlan Graves, wants the land. Says it's prime for condos, progress, or whatever he calls it. He's been pressuring folks to leave, cutting utilities, sending notices that scare everyone. Mum's too weak to fight, and well, you saw." She gestured vaguely at her cane, the white stick leaning against the table like a surrendered flag. Jonah's jaw tightened, the name Graves stirring a vague unease. He'd heard whispers in biker circles. Graves Development, a slick operation buying up rundown neighborhoods, displacing families with legal tricks and veiled threats. No outright violence, but the kind of corruption that eroded lives quietly, like rust on chrome. Iron Promise had tangled with types like him before, standing guard for evicted vets or hauling gear for flood victims. This felt personal now, a direct strike at the promise he'd failed once. "He won't touch your home," Jonah said, the words of vow taking shape. "Not while we're around." Big Tom stepped closer, his shadow falling over them like a shield. "Boss, we've got ears everywhere. I can put out feelers, see what Graves is planning." The second-in-command's eyes, steady under a furrowed brow, held the unspoken loyalty of a man who'd ridden through fire with Jonah. They'd met in the haze of a desert deployment years back, 2 soldiers trading war stories over lukewarm beer, forging a bond that outlasted uniforms. Tom nodded toward the crew, already distributing food with efficient grace, turning pity into purpose. Mara's hand reached out again, finding Jonah's wrist unerringly. "Why'd you stop coming back? Mom never blamed you. She said promises like yours don't break easy, but life, it pulls hard." The question hung, forcing Jonah to confront the scars he'd hidden under ink and leather. "After the bridge, my club hit rough waters. A brother turned informant, fed info to rivals. We lost good men, barely held the line. I poured everything into keeping Iron Promise whole. Runs to the border, deals that kept us afloat. Thought about that ring, about her, but every time I turned toward Milford, something pulled me back. Cowardice, maybe, or just the grind." His voice cracked on the last word, the admission tasting like ash. But saying it aloud loosened something, a knot unraveling. From the lot, the engines revved softly as riders finished their tasks, the convoy ready to roll. Jonah stood, helping Mara up, her trust in his guidance a quiet redemption. "We're taking you home," he said. "And tomorrow we start making things right. Mobility aids, doctors who'll listen, no more waiting in lines alone. Iron Promise doesn't just ride, we deliver." As they walked toward the bikes, the night air whispered through the square, carrying the faint scent of blooming night jasmine from cracked sidewalks. Mara mounted behind Jonah on his bike, her arms tentative around his waist, the ring's cool metal pressing against his skin through his shirt, a reminder, a compass. The convoy formed up, headlights piercing the dusk like stars aligning. Graves's shadow loomed, but so did the Brotherhood, ex-Marines like Tom, mechanics with hearts of steel, nurses who'd patched them up on dark roads. They were the family chosen in the roar of engines, bound by oaths deeper than blood. The bikes thrummed to life, a symphony of power and promise, carrying Mara toward her mother and Jonah toward the man he'd buried. In the rear view, the square faded, but the weight of honor grew, pulling them into the unknown with unyielding force. And now, I invite you to leave in the comments where you're watching from and the exact hour you heard this story. We wish to know how far these northern confessions travel and at what moments they reach you. The motorcycles carved through Milford's narrow streets, their headlights slicing the encroaching night like blades through silk. The air rushed cool and sharp against Jonah's face, laced with the faint acrid tang of distant rain on hot pavement. Mara clung to him from behind, her arms a light anchor around his waist, her cheek pressed against the worn leather of his vest. The ring on his finger caught the glow of passing street lamps, a subtle flash that felt like a heartbeat, syncing with the engine's steady pulse. Behind them, the convoy stretched in a disciplined line, 30 riders, shadows merging into one unbreakable force. Their engines a low chorus that drowned out the city's indifferent hum. They pulled up to the Elm Street apartments as the first stars pierced the velvet sky, the building looming like a forgotten sentinel. It was a squat complex of faded brick and peeling paint, windows glowing faintly from within, but the lot was scarred, potholes like open wounds, chain-link fences sagging under years of neglect. Jonah killed his engine first, the silence settling heavy, broken only by the soft tick of cooling metal. He helped Mara dismount, her cane extending with a practiced flick, tapping the uneven ground as if mapping the home she'd defended alone. Big Tom and a few others fanned out, securing the perimeter with quiet efficiency, their boots crunching gravel in a rhythm that spoke of vigilance without alarm. "Home, sweet home," Mara murmured, a wry edge to her voice that masked the tremor beneath. She led the way up the cracked steps, Jonah at her side, his hand hovering near her elbow, not guiding but ready. The door to Unit 12 creaked open under her key, releasing a wave of stale air, thick with the scent of medicinal herbs and unwashed linens. Inside, the space was dim, lit by a single lamp's warm halo, furniture arranged in careful clusters to navigate the unseen. Posters of distant landscapes, sunsets over canyons, waves crashing on unseen shores, adorned the walls, tactile maps for a world Mara could only imagine through stories. "Eleanor," Jonah called softly, his voice echoing the gravelly timbre from that long-ago night. From the bedroom, a faint rustle answered, followed by the laboured slide of a wheelchair across worn carpet. Elena Lewis emerged into the light, a woman in her late 40s whose once vibrant features were now hollowed by time and trial. Her leg, braced and scarred from surgeries that never quite mended, dragged slightly as she wheeled closer. Her eyes, sharp despite the pain-etching lines around them, widened at the sound of his voice, recognition dawning like a spark in dry tinder. "You," she breathed, the word a fragile bridge across 8 years. She reached out, her hand trembling, and Jonah knelt to meet it, enclosing her fingers in his calloused palm. The ring glinted between them, and Elena's thumb traced its knot instinctively, a ghost of memory surfacing. The bridge, Your words. I held this through the fever dreams, the nights when I thought I'd fade. Tears welled in her eyes, not of sorrow, but release, the kind that washed away the sediment of waiting. Mara stood beside her, silent tears tracing her cheeks, the family circle closing around the man who'd become legend in their whispers. Jonah's throat tightened anew, the weight of his absence pressing like an unyielding chain. "I failed you," he admitted, the confession raw in the quiet room. Life twisted the road away, club troubles, losses that chained me, but hearing your daughter's voice, it pulled me back. I'm here now, Elena. Iron Promise is here. He glanced toward the door, where Tom leaned against the frame, nodding subtly. The crew had already begun. 2 riders unloading medical supplies from saddlebags, bandages, pain relievers, even a portable oxygen unit scavenged from a sympathetic contact. Another, a former nurse named Riley with tattoos snaking up her arms, stepped in quietly, offering a gentle assessment of Elena's condition without a word of intrusion. Elena squeezed his hand, her grip surprisingly firm. "You didn't fail. You gave us hope when there was none. But now, Graves, he's circling like a vulture. Letters demanding we leave by month's end, threats veiled in legalese. The building's utilities flicker, power cuts at night, water that tastes of rust. He claims eminent domain for some grand project, but it's greed, plain. We've got nowhere else. The hospitals won't take us without proof of stability." Jonah's jaw set, a familiar fire kindling in his chest, the same that had driven him through war zones and back-alley standoffs. Harlan Graves wasn't new to his world. Whispers in dive bars painted him as a developer with deep pockets and deeper shadows, buying loyalty from officials who turned blind eyes to displaced families. No outright force, just erosion, notices that piled like debt, repairs ignored until homes crumbled. Iron Promise had crossed paths with his kind before, shielding a widow's farm from bulldozers or escorting elders to hearings where truth was bartered like scrap. This struck deeper, tying to the promise he'd nearly broken forever. "We'll handle Graves," Jonah said, rising slowly, his presence filling the small space like a bulwark. "First Light, we'll get you seen by specialists, advocates who know the system's cracks. Riley here can start with mobility training for Mara, real tools, not handouts. And protection, our riders will patrol these streets, no more shadows creeping in." He turned to Mara, who nodded, her face alight with a hope she'd long set aside. "You've carried this alone too long, kid. Time to share the load." Outside, the convoy idled, engines murmuring like a promise kept. Tom pulled Jonah aside as Elena and Mara retreated to the kitchen, the soft clink of mugs signaling a fragile normalcy. "Graves has pull, city council ties, private security that plays dirty without fingerprints. I called in favors, our network's lighting up, ex-vet contacts in the planning office, a lawyer who owes us from that flood relief run. But boss, this could draw heat, you sure?" Jonah met his gaze, the night air cool against his skin, carrying the distant wail of a siren that echoed his resolve. "Sure as the road under our wheels, that ring, it's not just metal, it's the vow I let rust. Elena and Mara, they're family now, chosen, like us." Tom's nod was all affirmation needed, the bond of brothers forged in silence. As the crew mounted up, leaving a few to stand watch through the night, Jonah lingered at the door. Mara pressed the cane into his hand briefly, a gesture of trust. "Thank you," she whispered, "for coming back." The bikes roared to life once more, headlights sweeping the street like beacons in fog. They rolled out, the apartments shrinking in the mirrors, but the pull of duty grew stronger, a compass realigning. Graves' empire loomed, corruption woven into the fabric of progress, but Iron Promise moved with the weight of honor, actions quiet yet seismic. In the rear view, the lit window of Unit 12 glowed. a fragile light against the dark, guarded now by oaths that time couldn't erode. Dawn would bring the fight, calls to allies, plans sketched over coffee black as midnight, resources marshaled like an army of the overlooked. Jonah gripped the throttle, the ring a steady pressure, guiding him not just forward, but true. The road ahead twisted with ethical snares, bribes to uncover, hearings to sway, but in the Brotherhood's roar, redemption found its rhythm 1 mile at a time. The first light of dawn crept over Milford's rooftops, painting the Iron Promise clubhouse in hues of pale gold and lingering grey. The old warehouse on the outskirts hummed with purpose, its corrugated walls echoing the clatter of tools and the murmur of voices. Jonah stood at the scarred wooden table in the centre, maps and scribbled notes spread before him like battle plans from a forgotten war. The air carried the rich, bitter scent of fresh brewed coffee, mingling with the faint, oily tang of motorcycle chains being oiled for the day ahead. His ring caught the light filtering through grimy windows, a subtle gleam that anchored him amid the rising tide of resolve. Big Tom paced nearby, his heavy boots thudding against the concrete floor. Phone pressed to his ear as he coordinated with allies scattered across the county. "Yeah, get me everything on Graves, permits, backers, the works," he growled into the receiver, his voice a low rumble that cut through the din. The crew had gathered at first call. Riley, the nurse with steady hands and a no-nonsense gaze, sorting medical kits. Jax, a wiry mechanic whose fingers flew over laptop keys, hacking into public records without leaving a trace. And Lena, a sharp-eyed advocate who'd traded her corporate suit for leathers after a club run, saved her sister's life. They moved like a well-oiled machine, each action a thread weaving protection around the Lewis family. Jonah's mind replayed the night before. The fragile warmth of Elena's hand, Mara's quiet trust as she'd mounted the bike. The promise he'd buried had resurfaced, demanding payment not in gold, but in the quiet labor of making amends. "We start with the basics," he said, his gravelly tone drawing eyes to him. "Riley, you and 2 others head to the apartments this morning. Get Elena assessed properly. No more patchwork from underfunded clinics. Push for that specialist in the city. I've got a contact who'll fast-track it." Riley nodded, zipping a bag with efficient snaps, her tattooed arms flexing under the weight of resolve. Outside, engines revved in the lot, a symphony building as riders prepped for patrols. The streets around Elm would be watched now, subtle loops on Harleys, eyes peeled for Graves's men, those suited enforcers who lingered like smoke. No aggression, just presence, the thunder of pipes announcing that the forgotten had guardians. Jonah traced a finger along the map, marking the developer's office downtown, a glass tower rising like a monolith amid the decay. "Tom, your call pull anything yet?" Tom pocketed his phone, rubbing his stubbled jaw. "Graves is slick. Filed for rezoning last month, claims the apartments are a safety hazard. Got council members in his pocket, ex-cops turned lobbyists, feeding him intel on holdouts like the Lewises. But here's the hook, he's cutting corners on inspections. Bribes to overlook structural reports that could bury him if they surface." A grim smile tugged at Tom's lips, the kind born from years of outmaneuvering shadows. They'd faced this before, in dusty border towns where greed displaced the vulnerable, but this felt laced with personal stakes, the ring's weight a constant reminder on Jonah's hand. As the sun climbed higher, casting long shadows across the table, doubt flickered in Jonah's chest, a psychological snag he'd long ignored. What if pushing back invited real danger? Graves' operation thrived on isolation, turning families against each other with whispers of easy payouts. Elena's frailty, Mara's blindness, they were vulnerabilities that could be exploited, twisted into leverage. He thought of the bridge again, the woman's voice fading in the dark, his words the only light. Failing them once had carved a hollow in him, repeating it would shatter what remained. "We do this clean," he said aloud, more to himself than the room. "No lines crossed, truth over fists, that's our code." The door banged open, admitting a rush of morning air laced with dew-kissed grass. Mara entered, guided by one of the riders, her cane tapping a confident rhythm that spoke of budding assurance. Behind her, Riley carried a lightweight training harness, sleek carbon fiber, designed for urban navigation, sourced overnight from a sympathetic supplier. Mara's face, pale but determined, turned toward Jonah's voice. "Mum's resting better already," she said, settling into a chair with a soft creak. "The oxygen unit. It's like breathing without the weight. But I wanted to be here. For this." Jonah knelt beside her, the concrete cool against his knees. "You're part of it now, kid. Iron Promise isn't blood. It's choice. We'll get you trained on these streets, tools that let you lead, not follow." Riley demonstrated the harness, its sensors beeping softly as Mara tested the straps, her fingers exploring the contours with tactile curiosity. Laughter bubbled from her, a rare light sound that cut the tension like sunlight through clouds. For a moment, the warehouse felt less like a fortress and more like a hearth, bonds forging in the quiet exchange of skills and stories. But the idyll shattered with Tom's phone buzzing again. He glanced at the screen, face hardening. Graves' crews at the apartments, serving eviction papers early, not waiting for the deadline. The room stilled, the air thickening with urgency. Jonah rose, grabbing his helmet from the hook, the leather creaking in his grip. "Mount up, we meet them there. Witnesses, not warriors. Lena, you're on the legal angle. Record everything." The convoy erupted into motion, bikes snarling to life in the lot, dust swirling in eddies as they peeled out. Jonah led, wind whipping his beard, the ring pressing like a talisman against the throttle. Elm Street approached, the apartment's faded brick now ringed by black sedans and men in crisp suits, clipboards in hand. Elena watched from the window, her silhouette frail but unbowed. Mara already inside, her new harness a symbol of emerging strength. They arrived in a thunderous wave, engines cutting to a purposeful idle. Jonah dismounted first, striding forward with measured steps, the crew fanning out behind him like a living barrier. The lead suit, a weaselly type with slicked hair and a forced smile, straightened, papers rustling in the breeze. "This is private property business," he sneered, but his eyes darted to the patches. Iron Promise, a name that carried weight in Milford's undercurrents. "We're here for the Lewises," Jonah replied, voice steady as bedrock, "and any business that smells of coercion stops now. We've got eyes on this, counsel, media contacts, push, and it unravels." The man faltered, glancing at his phone as Lena approached, camera rolling, her questions sharp as switchblades. Dates, signatures, the hidden bribes Tom had unearthed. Tension coiled like a spring, the air humming with unspoken threats. The suit's security hovering at the edges, hands itching near concealed holsters. Jonah's pulse thrummed, a moral tightrope. Stand firm without sparking the blaze. One wrong word, and the ethical ground could shift, drawing innocence into the fray. But in Mara's voice from the doorway, "We're not leaving," he found his anchor. The suits retreated, papers unserved, tails between legs, the first crack in Graves' facade. As the convoy regrouped, the morning sun warmed the pavement, casting the scene in triumphant light. Jonah watched Mara step out, harness humming faintly, her path surer. The developer would counter, shadows lengthening, but Iron Promise pressed on, advocacy calls echoing, patrols tightening, redemption unfolding one unyielding mile at a time. The ring turned in his fingers, a vow renewed, pointing toward justice's distant horizon. If this chapter stirred something in you, hit that like button. It helps these stories reach more roads. The midday sun beat down on Milford's courthouse steps, turning the granite into a slab of unrelenting heat that radiated through Jonah's boots. The air hung heavy with the scent of sun-baked stone and distant traffic exhaust, a faint haze blurring the edges of the old building's columns. Inside, the marble halls echoed with the shuffle of harried clerks and the murmur of cases waiting their turn. But Jonah's focus narrowed to the hearing room door, where Lena paced like a caged panther, her leather jacket slung over one arm, tablet clutched like a shield. The Iron Promise crew had split duties, Tom coordinating patrols from the clubhouse, Riley staying with Elena and Mara to continue the mobility sessions, while Jonah and a handful of riders stood vigil outside, their presence a subtle thunder that deterred any wandering eyes from Graves' network. He leaned against a pillar, the cool shadow offering scant relief, his ring thumbed absently as he replayed the morning's standoff. The suits had slunk away, but victory felt fragile. Like a patched tire on rough road, holding for now, but one bump could shred it. Graves wouldn't yield easily. Men like him built empires on the backs of the overlooked, their corruption a slow poison that seeped into institutions meant to protect. Jonah's mind drifted to Elena's words the night before, her voice frail but fierce. "We've lost enough. Don't let him take our ground." It echoed the bridge, that desperate plea in the dark, binding him tighter to this fight. Redemption wasn't a grand gesture, it was these moments, standing firm when the pull to walk away whispered loudest. The door swung open, spilling Lena into the hall, her face a mask of controlled fury. "It's a stall," she said, voice low and edged with gravel from the tension. The judge, some old-timer with Graves' donations on record, postponed the eviction hearing, cited insufficient notice. But it's bought time for them to fabricate more dirt, complaints about the building's deterioration, anonymous tips to child services questioning Mara's care. She glanced at Jonah, her eyes sharp under the fluorescent glare. "They're painting Eleanor as unfit, the home unsafe. If we don't counter fast, social workers show up, and it's leverage to force a sale." Jonah's fist clenched, the ring biting into his palm, a sharp reminder of vows that demanded action, not anger. This was the ethical snare he'd feared. Corruption twisting justice into a noose for the vulnerable. Graves operated in shadows, using the system's weight against those too weary to swing back. No fists here, just truth unearthed, alliances forged in the quiet hours. "What do we need?" he asked, pushing off the pillar, his broad frame casting a long shadow that seemed to steady her. Documents, Elena's medical history, proof of payments on the lease, witnesses to the harassment and pressure, petitions from the neighbors, media whispers about Graves' shady deals. Lena's tablet beeped, pulling up a file. Tom's got a lead on an ex-employee, someone who handled the bribes, willing to talk if we guarantee protection. Jonah nodded, the plan crystallizing like dew on cold metal. Iron Promise thrived on this, networks of the sidelined, vets who'd seen too much red tape, mechanics who'd fixed rigs for displaced families, even a journalist who'd ridden with them during a hurricane relief run. They were the chosen kin, loyalty etched deeper than tattoos. Back at the clubhouse by early afternoon, the air thrummed with urgency, sunlight slanting through high windows to illuminate the central table, now cluttered with printouts and steaming mugs. The crew had swelled. Jax hunched over his laptop, fingers dancing across keys to pull property records, his brow furrowed in concentration. A burly rider named Mac, whose war scars mirrored Jonah's own, sketched patrol routes on a grease-stained map. Mara sat nearby, her new harness adjusted and humming faintly as she practiced audio cues with Riley, the device's soft chimes blending with the low buzz of conversation. Elena had insisted on coming, wheeled in by a prospect, her presence a quiet anchor that silenced doubts. Jonah took the head, his voice cutting through like a revving engine. Graves is playing the long game, but we hit harder. Lena, rally the neighbors, door to door if needed. Show them we're not just bikers. We're the wall between them and the bulldozers. Heads nodded, the room pulsing with that unspoken bond, forged in late-night rides and shared silences after losses. He turned to Mara, her unseeing gaze fixed on his direction by sound alone. "Kid, your stories, tell the council. Not the accident, but the strength. Make 'em see the lives they're uprooting." Mara's fingers tightened on the harness straps, a tentative smile breaking through. "Mom and we've held on because of promises like yours. I can do it." Elena reached for her hand, the gesture simple yet seismic, mother and daughter united in the face of erosion. Jonah watched, a swell of something profound rising in his chest, not just guilt lifted, but purpose reclaimed. The bridge had been survival, this was legacy, honor passed like the ring from palm to palm. But as the group dispersed into action, a shadow crept in. Tom's phone rang, the tone sharp against the warehouse's echo. He answered, face darkening with each word. "Graves knows we're involved. Sent a message through a middleman. Back off, or the Lewises face accidents." Power lines cut for real this time, maybe worse. The room stilled, the air thickening with the weight of real peril. Jonah's pulse quickened, a psychological vice tightening. Push too hard, and innocence paid. Pull back, and the promise crumbled again. Memories flooded, brothers lost to rival ambushes, the betrayal that had chained him to endless roads. No, not this time. The fight wasn't against Graves alone, but the cowardice that let men like him thrive. "We double patrols," Jonah said, voice steady despite the storm inside. "No one rides alone. And that ex-employee? Escort him here. Safe house if needed." Tom clapped his shoulder, the contact a lifeline, their shared history a bulwark against the doubt. As the crew mobilized, bikes firing up in staccato bursts outside, Jonah stepped into the sunlight, the heat a forge tempering his resolve. The ring warmed on his finger, no longer a relic of failure, but a guide pointing through the moral fog. By dusk, the first threads unraveled. Jax uncovered falsified inspection reports, timestamps linking them to Graves' shell company. Lena returned with a stack of signed affidavits from Elm Street residents, their voices a chorus against the greed. Mara, emboldened, recorded a statement, her words clear, rhythmic, evoking the bedtime tales that had sustained her. Elena listened from her chair, pride etching her features, the family's fragility yielding to collective steel. Yet tension coiled tighter as night fell, stars pricking the sky like distant warnings. A lone rider reported shadows near the apartments, Graves security testing edges, tires crunching gravel too close. Jonah mounted his bike, the engine's roar a vow against the encroaching dark. The convoy formed, headlights piercing the gloom, carrying them back to Elm. In the wind's rush, he felt the pull of redemption, not a solitary path, but one shared, the Brotherhood's thunder drowning out the whispers of retreat. There, under the moon's pale watch, they stood guard, engines idling like heartbeats in unison. Graves's empire loomed larger, ethical battles brewing in boardrooms and back alleys, but iron promise pressed on, quiet actions rippling into waves of justice. The ring gleamed faintly, a compass true, leading Jonah deeper into the honor he'd reclaim, one shadowed mile at a time. The night air over Elm Street carried a chill that seeped through Jonah's leather vest, sharp as the edge of a blade, mingling with the faint metallic scent of dew settling on rusted chain link. The Iron Promise convoy idled in a loose semicircle around the apartments, headlights dimmed to pools of amber that cast elongated shadows across the potholed lot. Engines purred low, a vigilant hum that masked the subtle creaks of cooling metal and the distant wail of a train slicing through the industrial haze. Jonah stood at the forefront, his boots planted firm on the gravel, eyes scanning the darkened perimeter where Graves' security had probed earlier. The ring on his finger felt heavier now, its promise not a tactile pulse against his skin, echoing the vows that bound him to this fragile vigil. Inside Unit 12, the lamp's glow filtered through thin curtains illuminating silhouettes. Elena in her wheelchair, Mara practicing the harness's audio cues with Riley's patient guidance. The soft beeps and murmurs formed a counterpoint to the outer tension, a bubble of normalcy forged from necessity. Jonah had insisted on the split. Half the crew here, the rest circling wider blocks, their roots a web of deterrence. No invasions, just the weight of presence. 30 riders, brothers and sisters chosen in the fire of shared roads. Their patches a silent declaration against the encroaching greed. A low rumble broke the rhythm, not from their bikes, but from the approach of black SUVs, sleek and predatory, rolling in from the alley like wolves, scenting weakness. Jonah raised a hand, the signal rippling through the line, engines quieted to whispers, riders dismounting with fluid grace, forming a human barrier without a word. The vehicles halted 20 yards out, doors opening to disgorge 4 men in dark suits, their postures rigid, faces illuminated by the harsh glare of interior lights. No weapons visible, but the bulge under jackets spoke volumes, the kind of private muscle that operated in legal grey zones, enforcers for empires built on displacement. The lead figure stepped forward, a tall man with a clipped beard and eyes like polished flint, clipboard in hand. "Mr. Cross, I presume," he said, voice smooth as oiled gears, carrying just enough authority to test boundaries. "Harlan Graves sends his regards. This little show's gone far enough. The Lewises have an offer, relocation assistance, new housing in the suburbs. Sign and it's done. No need for complications." His gaze flicked to the apartments, then back, assessing the rider's unyielding line. Tom at Jonah's right, massive arms crossed. Lena to the left, phone recording discreetly, her stare a challenge. Jonah didn't move, his breath steady, the cadence Elena had described, thunder that's safe, now a shield for the family within. The air thickened, charged with the unspoken, one push, and the ethical line blurred, drawing the innocent into the fray. He'd seen it before, in war-torn streets where good intentions sparked worse fires, leaving scars that time couldn't mend. "Tell Graves we're not buying," Jonah replied, words measured, gravelly depth underscoring each syllable. "The Lewises stay, and if complications mean threats, we've got records. Your boss's bribes, the faked reports. Push, and it all spills into the light." The man's smile didn't reach his eyes, a flicker of calculation crossing his features as he glanced at his companions, who shifted subtly, hands near hips. The convoy tensed, boots scraping gravel in unison, the collective inhale a warning without aggression. Inside, Mara's voice carried faintly through the cracked window. "Mom, it's okay. They're here." A thread of trust that anchored Jonah against the rising doubt. What if this escalated? Graves' reach extended to judges, cops on payroll. A single accident could unravel everything, echoing the losses that had pulled him from his original promise. Redemption demanded precision, not recklessness. Justice through integrity, not the corruption they fought. From the shadows, a new sound emerged. The whine of a police cruiser approaching, lights off, but siren silent, pulling up beside the SUVs. Out stepped Officer Hale, a grizzled vet with a limp from old service, his badge glinting under the moon. Jonah knew him peripherally, shared a beer once, after a club charity ride, mutual respect for men who'd traded uniforms for leathers. Hale's eyes swept the scene, lingering on the suits before settling on Jonah. "Evening, Vale. Got a call about a disturbance. Everything civil here?" The lead suit straightened, confidence cracking like thin ice. "Just serving notice, officer. private matter. But Hale's nod was toward Jonah, a subtle tilt acknowledging the undercurrents. Heard about Graves's plays. My shift ends soon. Mind if I stick around? Keep things quiet. It was alliance, unspoken but ironclad, the web of chosen family extending to those who'd walked similar paths. The suits exchanged glances, the momentum shifting like wind off the desert, their threats deflating in the face of multiplied eyes. As the cruiser idled, a barrier of its own, the lead man pocketed his clipboard. This isn't over. Graves will have his way. Eminent domain doesn't bend for biker clubs. He retreated to the SUV, doors slamming with forced finality, taillights fading into the night. The air eased, tension uncoiling like a released spring, but Jonah's chest remained tight, the psychological weight lingering. They'd bought time, exposed a vein of vulnerability in Graves's armor, but the developer would strike harder, perhaps through the courts, twisting Mara's care into ammunition or Eleanor's health into grounds for intervention. Tom clapped Jonah's shoulder, the contact solid as forged steel. That was clean. Hale's one of us. O's from that warehouse fire last year. We'll lean on him for intel. The riders remounted slowly, engines stirring back to life. The convoy's roar, a triumphant underscore as they resumed patrols. Jonah lingered, knocking softly on the door before entering. Inside, Eleanor wheeled forward, her face pale but eyes alight. Heard the voices. You sent them running? Jonah knelt, the ring catching the lamp's glow as he took her hand. For now. But it's ramping up. We need more. Your full story for the hearing. Every detail of the harassment. Mara approached, harness secure, her steps surer in the familiar space. I'll speak too, about the promise that brought you back. It's our truth against their lies. The room filled with quiet purpose. Riley adjusting Elena's brace with gentle efficiency. Lena uploading footage to secure drives. Outside, the night deepened. Stars wheeling overhead like distant sentinels. Jonah stepped onto the stoop, the cool breeze carrying the faint jasmine from cracked planters, a reminder of fragile beauty amid the grind. Doubt gnawed, a whisper of what if they couldn't hold. But the Brotherhood's vigilance, Hale's timely shadow, Mara's emerging voice, they wove a net stronger than any alone. As the convoy looped back, headlights sweeping the streets, Jonah gripped the throttle, the engine's vibrations syncing with his resolve. Graves' next move brewed in shadowed offices, ethical snares tightening, falsified welfare checks, media smears painting iron promise as vigilantes. Yet in the ring's steady weight, he found clarity, the vow not just to save, but to stand, redeeming the years lost by building a legacy of unyielding honor. The road twisted ahead toward dawn's confrontation, where truth would clash with corruption in the light of day. The first rays of dawn sliced through the haze over Milford's courthouse, gilding the columns in a fleeting warmth that belied the chill of anticipation. Jonah's bike idled at the curb, its engine a low thrum syncing with the pulse in his temples, the air crisp with the scent of dew-kissed lawns and the faint, acrid bite of exhaust from early commuters. The Iron Promise crew had arrived en masse, 30 strong, their chrome beasts lined like silent sentinels along the block, vests gleaming under the rising sun. No show of force, just unyielding presence. A brotherhood's quiet declaration that promises held weight against the grind of corruption. Inside, the hearing room buzzed with restrained tension, wooden benches creaking under the weight of gathered neighbors from Elm Street, their faces a tapestry of weathered resolve. Elena wheeled in first, her braced leg trailing slightly, Mara at her side with the harness humming softly, guiding her steps through the unfamiliar echo of marble floors. Jonah followed, his boots echoing like measured heartbeats, the ring on his finger a cool anchor amid the swirl of legal murmurs. Lena led the charge, Her tablet, an arsenal of unearthed truths. Falsified reports, bribe trails linking Graves to council pockets, affidavits from the ex-employee now under club protection. Officer Hale lingered at the periphery, his uniform a subtle shield, nodding to Jonah as they took seats near the front. Harlan Graves sat across the aisle, a silver-haired figure in a tailored suit. His expression a mask of polished indifference flanked by lawyers whose briefcases bulged with counters. No direct threats now, just the institutional machinery he'd oiled, turning displacement into doctrine. The judge, an older man with wire-rimmed glasses, called the session to order, gavel rapping like a starting pistol. "Matter of Lewis vs. Graves development," he intoned, voice dry as old paper. "Eviction and rezoning petition." Lena rose first, her words sharp and rhythmic, painting the canvas of harassment, flickering utilities as sabotage, notices laced with intimidation, the slow erosion of lives for profit's sake. She projected the documents on a screen, timestamps glaring like accusations, the room's air thickening with the weight of exposure. Graves' lead counsel countered with slick legalese, eminent domain for public good. The apartment's a hazard per inspected reports. But cracks showed. The judge's brow furrowed at the discrepancies, Hale's testimony slipping in as a neutral witness, detailing patterns of undue pressure that echoed too many unsolved complaints. Then Elena spoke, her voice frail but threaded with steel, recounting the bridge's shadow over their years, the survival bought by a stranger's words, the home that had cradled her through fevers and fears. "We've held on because some promises endure," she said, hand finding Mara's, the gesture a quiet force. Mara followed, standing tall, her harness's cues a soft underscore to her narrative. "I know the world by sound and story. Mom's tales of a man who guided her from the dark. They shaped me. This home is our anchor, not a liability. Take it, and you steal more than walls." Her words, rhythmic as the bedtime rhythms Jonah had unwittingly inspired, hung in the air, evoking the human cost amid the jargon. Whispers rippled through the benches, neighbors nodding, the ethical tide turning against Graves's empire. Jonah testified last, called as a character witness, but weaving deeper threads. His gravelly baritone filled the space, steady as the voice that had pulled Elena from rubble. "I made a promise 8 years ago, one I let slip. But it led me here, to stand for folks the system forgets. Iron promise isn't about chaos, we're about delivery, safeguarding what's right when greed circles." He didn't mention the ring, but its presence thrummed, a silent vow renewed. Graves shifted, his facade cracking as Lena introduced the ex-employee's affidavit, detailing cash handoffs in shadowed lots, the developer's fingerprints on every forged seal. The judge recessed briefly, the room holding its collective breath, the scent of polished wood and tension mingling like storm clouds. Outside, the crew waited, engines off but ready, Tom's massive frame a bulwark by the doors. When the gavel fell again, the ruling landed like dawn's light-breaking fog. Petition denied. "Insufficient evidence of hazard, allegations of impropriety warrant investigation," the judge declared, eyes lingering on Graves with newfound scrutiny. "The Lewises retain tenancy pending full review. Any further interference will be met accordingly." Relief washed through the hall. Not explosive, but profound. Embraces among neighbors, Elena's tears, silent tracks of release as Mara hugged her tight. Graves stormed out, his entourage trailing like deflated shadows, but Jonah caught the developer's glare, a promise of counters yet to come. No victory was final in these battles. Corruption's roots ran deep, but this strike severed a vital vein, buying the time for deeper probes, federal eyes now turning toward Graves's web. As the group emerged into the sunlight, the convoy roaring to life in salute, Jonah knelt before Elena and Mara, the pavement warm under his knees. "It's not over," he said, voice thick. "But you've got us now. Full repairs on the apartments. Specialists for you both. No more scraping." Elena clasped his hand, thumb tracing the ring's knot once more. "You kept it alive, Vale. That's the real promise." Mara smiled, her face tilted toward the sun's warmth she couldn't see but felt. "Family's what we choose. Thank you for riding back." The bikes thrummed eastward toward the clubhouse where celebrations waited, simple, heartfelt, shared meals from the charity runs, stories exchanged over cooling engines. Jonah rode in the lead, wind whipping his beard, the ring gleaming like a beacon. Redemption had unfolded not in blaze, but in persistence, the moral justice of truth prevailing, the chosen family's loyalty a fortress against cynicism. Graves's shadow lingered, ethical reckonings brewing in distant offices, but iron promise rolled on, actions silent yet seismic, honoring the vows that time couldn't bury. In the rear view, Elm Street's apartment stood taller, lights glowing against the afternoon sky, a testament to honor reclaimed. Jonah's tears, long dried, left a quiet peace. The road ahead clear for the first time in years. Thank you for riding this journey with us. If these tales of promise and redemption resonate, subscribe for more stories that honor the unbreakable bonds we choose.